For our next session, we have a panel, a great panel for you. This is going to be moderated by Aaron Walz, so I'm going to introduce him. Aaron is a composer and sound designer for casual, social, and mobile games. He graduated cum laude with a BA in music from Sonoma State University. He wrote theme song for top-ranking Facebook adventure Ravenwood Fair, and produces audio for Shanda and Sherry Credits' regional releases of Dragon Nest and SD Gundam Capsule Fighter. He's won lots of awards for all kinds of things, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. He's a great composer and a great guy, and he's the advisory guy and organizer of this audio track. Let's hear it for Aaron Walz.
Thanks, Greg. So if you're just joining us, I'm just going to talk about a little bit of logistics. There's a lot of mics in here. I know it's a small room, but we're recording this for the web. So at any time when I ask if there's questions, make sure you have a mic in front of you when you ask the questions. Also, there's water back there and a restroom if you haven't found it. And finally, we do have a party at the end of the day. It's at a place called Saluna. And Greg has my notes, I think. Oh, no, I have them here. So it's nearby. It is at 272 McAllister Street. It's at 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock for audio people. I'm going to warn you that people are going to get turned away, so definitely make sure you're on time or a little bit early, and you'll get to mingle with all the audio people. It's the 3rd annual audio party at Casual Connect, so it's very exciting. So Saluna at 6 o'clock. So we're going to talk about basically tips for being a successful game audio contractor. So I'm focusing on contractors rather than in-house type things. Later in the day, if you've looked at the schedule, you'll see we're also kind of talking about dealing with game developers and contracts and all of that. We're going to touch lightly on that, but I'm not going to go too in-depth because I don't want to take away from that discussion later on in the day. That is at, 3 o'clock. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, but I have 4 really, really awesome panelists. So if you just kind of want to go in order, starting with Barry, introduce yourselves a little bit, like name and where you work and all that, blood type.
Okay. I'm Barry DOWSETT. I am a composer and co-founder of Sound Rangers, which is a game audio company, and co-founder of the GA as well. And I've been doing game audio for a long, long time, and I can talk more as we get into the individual questions.
Hi, my name's Dren McDonald, and I was previously audio director at Loot Drop and at Low Lapse, and currently contracted for my own company, Nerd Tracks, and compose and sound design and implement and audio direct, etc.
Hey, I'm Rich Freeland, go by Disaster Piece. I've done music for games like Fez, Shoot Many Robots, some other stuff. Also do some sound design, and I'm a freelancer.
My name is Nick. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Somatone. We've been doing casual game audio for about 10 years. I'm not a composer, and I'm not really a sound designer anymore either, so I sit more in between the developers and the content team and manage that whole production.
Great. So we're very happy to have all of you here. So I just want to talk about some rules and basics of this panel so that we're all on the same page. One, we're here to provide education for the game audio community. We aim to help rookie people, indies, as well as experts and people who have been doing this a long, long time. We're trying to elevate the perceived and actual worth of game audio, so what game developers will pay and what game developers understand, our challenges and expenses and our skill set. To raise the bar of game audio, to increase understanding, solve problems that we have, because unless you guys don't have any problems, I certainly come to a lot of problems in my day, and to continue to evolve our craft. So let's all be honest, open, receptive, respectful, forthcoming. Sometimes, when I first started speaking at Casual Connect like 5 years ago, or maybe longer, I don't remember, 6 years ago, it was like, I don't want to give away my secrets, or, I'm going to sound dumb because everyone knows this. But in reality, everyone doesn't know everything, and I learn from every single person who speaks something new. And also, no one uses all your secrets and succeeds, really. It's a lot more complicated than just a simple little factoid. But do be prepared to argue and disagree. That's awesome. I want to see some gauntlets being thrown. That's cool. But don't try to prove how awesome and smart you are, because we're all awesome and smart. And don't shamelessly market yourself, okay? So those are the rules. Now, my first question for any and all of you, we don't all have to answer these questions, but how important do you think your degree is? For people who want to be in game audio, what kind of degree do you have? Do you think it was the right degree? I personally have a classical music degree, which was actually rather unusual in this field. So anyone who wants to field that, please.
I'll start on that. So I went to Berklee College of Music, and I studied music production and engineering and music business. And that's exactly what I do. And I think it's a fantastic school, and I have drawn on my education entirely throughout my career. So I feel very strongly, actually, that a solid career in production and in business in music is invaluable for being successful.
I went to Berklee as well, and I studied music synthesis. I think I see one of my teachers here. Hi, Mike. Hey. I think for me it was an invaluable experience. I think when I first started writing music, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, and it was good to have some concrete directions that a school or a resource like Berklee was providing to kind of give me a kick in the butt to kind of make some decisions about what I was going to do. And I think, like Nick said, I've drawn on the stuff I've learned in school. I draw on it almost every single day. So for me, it was great. I don't know if it's for everybody. I mean, and there are other concerns you have to think about, finance, etc. But yeah.
I had sort of an unusual education line. I started out as a music major at Long Beach State, and I didn't like the program there at all. And then I went to Golden West College, where they had a recording engineering program, and I learned a lot in that, but then I didn't stick around for that and went back to Long Beach and graduated as an English major. So the English major thing actually does help a lot, actually. I feel like understanding narrative actually really helps in this business. There's a great quote from Elmer Bernstein, I think, who said, "The dirty secret here is composers aren't really musicians, we're dramatists." And I think that actually does really apply. The one thing I do have a problem with is a lot of these programs that say that will get you game jobs. We have this whole game education program will help you get game jobs. And this is one thing that I think, if you're actually looking for a school and you find one that says, "I'm going to get you a job in the game industry," we're studying FMOD, I take that with a grain of salt. I think that there's not a lot of game jobs out there. And, there's a lot of extracurricular learning out there that you have to do. And I've probably relied on that a lot more than anything I learned at school. That's just my 2 cents.
I have a degree in music, and I just finished a master's degree in film music composition. And I would say that specifically within the cinematic realm and how it applies to games, having a knowledge of live ensemble work and so forth is really useful, and being trained and knowing some of the components that go into that, and harmony and melody, and how the relationships between all that, and putting that into a live ensemble is pretty much what I reference every day. So I would say from an educational standpoint, it's very, very useful for sure.
Great. Okay, next question is, these are some of my favorite books I've read in my career that really helped me with game audio. Do you have any that aren't on this list? So we have Game Audio by Aaron Marks, Game Sound by Karen Collins, The Fat Man, George Sanger on game audio, Mixing Secrets by Mike Sr., MIDI Orchestration by Paul Gilreath, and Sound Effects Bible by Rick Veers. Do you have any you can think of that are not on this list? Because I think these are all awesome.
One thing I might add to that is just checking sites like designingsound.org, if anyone's familiar with that site. There's new articles on it all the time, and it's just got some brilliant stuff up there. And they have guest contributors every month, like a guest sound designer who'll be on there all month just writing about their techniques. I think that's really valuable. Also, there's a lot of great information. I think someone else mentioned it on macprovideo.com as far as tutorials, learning mixing techniques and learning software. Logic 10 just came out. There's a whole slew of stuff on there in Logic 10. There's Unity 3D audio stuff on there. So a lot of great stuff on the web. And Designing Sound is a free site, and there's Creating Sound, and there's a few others that are really good. Gama Sutra, too, obviously.
The book that I want to mention is not a game audio book, but it's a music book. It's called The Listening Book, and it's a really great book for just creativity and brainstorming. I kind of have a thing for those kind of books. I tend to prefer those to like technical type books. Maybe it's just the way I learn, or I'm not sure, but yeah.
And that's by Loudon Matthew, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a good book. I like that book too. Cool. Okay. So 2 more questions on this page. One is, are there any affiliation clubs or groups that you think are important to be a game audio professional, to be a part of, and why? And 2, do you participate in any type of live performance? Are you a guitarist, a singer, etc.? For me personally, I've been a choral singer for a long, long time and a piano player, but the choral singing, especially because we do very modern works that are really interesting, and it really makes my ear, wake up and hear new things, and it helps my composition, it informs it. So, do any of you have anything to comment on either of those questions?
You perform.
The internet is a good group to be a part of. I don't think I don't have any affiliations really outside of that.
But you perform.
I do perform, yes. Performing is great. It sort of gives you a nice, kind of like a measuring stick, separate perspective from your composition work. I haven't really figured it out. I've been doing it for about 5 years, but I haven't really figured out what I'm doing or why or any of those things. So I don't know how useful that is, but it's fun and it makes people happy. So.
Do you guys want to go?
I'm not affiliated with any groups, so
I don't have time to
Okay.
do a performance, so
All right.
that's my excuse.
I feel obligated to mention Gang because I'm the director of development with Gang. So Gang is a game audio network guild, and audiogang.org, and it's a great group of seasoned veterans and beginners, and you can go there to get lots of information if you're new to the industry. And I'll just say that. Check out audiogang.org if you haven't yet. And I used to perform a lot live. In fact, that's what I did most of my music career after college. I toured and did that sort of thing, but I don't really do it much anymore. I try to. It's fun, but like Barry said, I don't really have too much time to do it.
You fantasize about it, though, right?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I don't fantasize about the 2 a.m. loadout, though.
Keeps you from doing it.
Great. Okay, so here's talking about kind of your workflow and working with clients. So just real quick, how many games do you all work on at once usually, and what are the timelines? So for me, I can work on anywhere between 3 and 8 games at once. The timelines range from like 2 days to a year. So it's pretty all over the place. I'd say generally they're 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer with revision and all of that. And usually working on about 4 or 5 games at a time.
You want to start?
Sure. I would say I work on too many games at once, and it's a constant struggle to reduce the number of games I'm working on. I'm fortunate enough right now, at least, that I have some opportunities coming my way. But I find that when I'm working on more than a handful of projects, inevitably certain things go by the wayside. People get upset with me because I miss certain deadlines, etc. Maybe I'm not. I don't really care, to be honest. Maybe it's not. You don't have the proper amount of focus when you're doing it that way. So there's a great quote. I think it's Picasso who said something like, "If you can if you can work on 3 things at once, work on 2 or something like that. And I think that's good advice.
I don't actually create content, but I manage a team of content creators, and we have the same problem actually with that Rich described. And I think it's a tough issue because you don't want to turn down work, but there is a real correlation between the time you can invest in a project and its quality level, and that is a struggle. I think, which hopefully you're lucky to have, and it's something that you have to manage on a case-by-case basis, making priorities and so forth. But in general, I think the rule of thumb ought to be quality over quantity, because overall that leads to more high-level work than a lot of low-quality work. And I think that's a better trade-off in the long run.
Yeah, there's no easy solution. I mean, I agree with what everybody is saying, and that there's bottlenecks, and there's times when you actually, pretty smooth sailing when don't have projects colliding amongst one another. I generally prefer to not, I'd rather do fewer projects at a higher quality than a lot of stuff at a lower quality, and sometimes it's a matter of doing due diligence with spreading the work around the team that I work with and how much workload I can take on myself as opposed to delegating that out and so forth. So there's no easy answer, no easy solution. Aaron?
Yep, great. Okay, so I'm going to kind of combine question 2 and 4 as I'm reading this. I'm tailoring things as our conversation goes. So 1 is, how do you get all these clients? You have too many, how do you get them in the first place? Do they just come to you? Do you meet them at Casual Connect? Do you meet them at GDC? This is a question that I get asked all the time by people just starting out in the industry. How do you get your clients? It definitely takes a couple of years to get a body of clients, and then hopefully if you do the right things, they keep coming back. I don't know, turning things in late, I'm not sure about that, but we'll let that slide. But anyway, so how do you get your clients? And as part of that, how important are these various things listed here? So how important is your website? How important are things like Casual Connect? How important is social media? Facebook page, Twitter? How important is public speaking, writing articles, all of these things, being interviewed, having a SoundCloud, is that important? These are a lot of things, obviously, but I'm just throwing them out here. Should you have your music on iTunes for sale? Do you do any paid advertising? So these are the question. I've done a little bit of all of these different things, really. I think certain things have helped more than others. I definitely think I'm an advocate of social media. I really like it. I interact with fans of the games that I've worked on. And so that's something that the game developers often really appreciate. Often I can partner with them and release the music on iTunes and, basically get all those people via Facebook and Twitter and get them to buy it and be more invested in the brand. So that's something that I think has been really, really cool. What do you guys want to share?
Well, I think for me personally, I've been fortunate enough to be in for a while, so I know a lot of people, and I am hired regularly by people I've known in the business for a while, and one person works at one development company and they inevitably move to another one, and so I think just through being in the industry long enough, you tend to, if you're a nice guy and do a good job and are diligent about what you do, you tend to have some repeat clients and so forth. So for me, personal relationship is probably number one without a doubt. I mean, you can get into the social media and all that, and I think it's great, but in the end, putting a face on what you do and having a good relationship and having a good communication with a developer, having a body of work that they know that you've done some stuff and can deliver on time and can deliver the right kind of content without a lot of reiterations and so forth, I think is really important. So, we spend some time doing, the conferences and social media and all that sort of stuff, but we also spend an enormous amount of time just lording over our clients and making sure they're getting what they need and generally just being good and easy to work with. I think that's worth its weight in gold for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things on the list was reputation, and I think that's kind of probably the number one. I think that's our currency, is having a great reputation. And of course, how do you get a gig, your first gig, without any reputation? So that's the trouble that, if you're beginning, how do you deal with that? And I think, if you're younger, if you're in school, get on some student projects or do some game jams. It used to be the mod world, but now it's really kind of like these game jams and student projects, or make your own iPhone project. It's not that hard anymore, and show off what you can do. Show people that you can complete things if you're just trying to get into the business. Show people you're a finisher. As far as getting work after you get past that point, like I said, reputation is a lot, and just showing up to GDC and Casual Connect and IGDA meetings and hanging out with people in your area where there are people doing game development, and they keep seeing your face, and you keep telling them what you do, and you have to say it over and over again, and eventually people will remember you. But you have to remember, it takes a lot of points of contact for people to kind of remember who you are and what you do and kind of what your thing is. Rich and I go to this East Bay game dev hangout in the East Bay, and there's people there who I know, and they still kind of, what do you do again? It's something with, I know it's something with audio because you got funny hair or whatever, So yeah, it's just a matter of kind of showing up all the time and meeting people. The social media stuff, I do a lot of stuff on Twitter, and I actually really enjoy it. I have met a lot of great audio friends on Twitter. Actually, friends I've made through just the game audio hashtag has proved to be really great.
I think I bet you on Twitter.
Probably, yeah.
I pretty much agree with everything these two guys said. I mean, I think when I look at that list, pretty much all of them, to me, they say, that it's really about visibility. You want to be as available as humanly possible, as available as you want to be. And, you especially, in the real world, you want to establish relationships with people. You want to go to stuff. You want to be like, hey, I'm here, and I'm doing this thing, while trying not to seem maybe too overbearing or desperate. But I think in the age of the internet, there are all these tools and resources that are ripe for the taking, that really can benefit. That really benefit. For me, it's been, in the last couple of years, it's been selling music online and selling game soundtracks online through Bandcamp. That's kind of opened the floodgates for me, and social media.
Just to touch on how you get new clients for people breaking in, I think one really cool way to do that is to find a game or a trailer or some media that's out there that you think you could do a better job with, and then capture that game and reskin it and just do your own treatment and get that in front of the people who produced the original content and let them know what you can do. It's a lot of just sort of legwork with no guaranteed compensation, but if you do that, you can open a lot of people's eyes to who you are and what your capabilities are, and that can lead to new projects coming in because they see you're proactive, they see that you're talented, and it's just one way to kind of break down doors and get noticed.
Just don't send it to the guy who did the original. That's right. The original content.
Make sure you know who it's going to.
Don't tweet it and say it's so much better than the original.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just say this is what I would have done with it. And if you happen to agree creatively, then that can create some relationship there.
Cool. All right, next slide here. So this is more about organization and how to stay sane, right? So do you have a special file naming system that you use, or is it dependent on the developer?
For us, it's developer dependent. It's their spec we have to work with.
Anyone different, or depends only on the developer? Because that's true for me. Yeah. Okay. And how do you organize all your assets needed? Do you use something like Google Docs or some kind of internal spreadsheet somewhere, or what do you use? I use Google Docs usually.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. You want to say that?
Oh, no, I was just saying it really depends on the client, whether they have, Perforce or something that you're privy to remoting into, or using Google Docs if they don't. But I think in general, from that side, that's good management. And then, of course, on the audio side, SoundMiner and some of the other sort of file management software to take care of stuff.
Right.
One thing I'll add to that is that one little thing I like to do as far as sending out rough versions of music is I won't actually send out files to clients anymore. I just post a private file on SoundCloud and just send them the link, because I'm sure it's happened to everyone up here that the wrong version of the file got into the game somehow. And so you don't want all these MP3s flowing around, and so that's generally what I do until we all agree that this is the final version, this is the revision that we're using. Then I send them that file. So just a helpful thing. I use Google Docs if it's up to me. If it's up to them, we have something else like Basecamp or something. I know Michael uses Basecamp. So, yeah.
And what about the delivery method? Do you use Dropbox at all?
I use Dropbox all the time. Yeah.
Any other competitors to Dropbox that you like? FTP?
Yeah.
Oh, that's old school.
Yeah, FTP.
Well, if you have very large files and you don't feel like paying for Dropbox.
Right. Right. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Do you have like a standard format that you send in? Do you always send in WAV format or uncompressed formats, or what if the client asks for MP3s? Do you provide them the original as well as the MP3, or how do you handle that? And then how do you handle volumes? Because I don't know how many times, of course, we have this throw over the fence mentality a lot of times with a lot of developers, where we're not implementing the audio, we're just giving the audio, and Lord knows how it's going to end up in the game. So a lot of times, I'll give them things and they end up maximizing everything and normalizing everything, and it's just totally loud and awful, and like I'll have like a quiet ambient like fan sound and it'll be at 100% volume.
I think as a general rule of thumb, I try to wrangle as much creative control from the developer as I possibly can. And if they have any notions about, we want to encode the sound ourselves, I try to persuade them otherwise. And mixing any sort of edge I can get in terms of having more control over my work, I'll take.
I'm going to plug my session later, which is fighting back against the mute switch in mobile audio, and use this as sort of a segue. We have to fight really hard to avoid that. It's a real struggle to get developers to give you the time and the attention to QC your own work after it's integrated, but it's really, 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 really important for the final product. No matter how good the individual assets are, if the mix sucks, the game will sound terrible. So you really have to fight for that. And it's worth the time, because you want to be able to point to your games when they're out there and show people work that you're proud of. And it so often happens that they mess it up after you hand it over. And so it's worth being very vigilant to try to be plugged in the QA process and get a chance to make those final changes before it ships.
And you don't always have the privilege of being able to go to the location of your developer, especially if they're far away. But if they're close enough, it doesn't hurt to just show up and kind of be like, "I'm here, let me do stuff." And it's because one of the most common problems when you work with developers and you're a contractor is that you're out of the loop and things happen and no one tells you, or they forget to tell you. It happens all the time, and it's really annoying. So if you can go to the place, go.
I've been in-house before, and I've been out of the loop. So these things just happen. So you just have to stay as vigilant as you can on it. I usually send both uncompressed and compressed files, and if they want MP3, usually I go through the loop. I try and send them seamless loop myself to be sure that it doesn't have a gap in it.
But do you keep old versions of the files on your computer? Because many times I've had them say, "Oh no, we liked revision 2 better," and I actually completely wrote over, in my DAW. It's like all different, and it's like, oh my god, I can't undo that.
Yeah, I save out versions every revision process we go through. I keep different versions of the sessions so I can go back to them. Yeah.
That's learned the hard way. And then what about rejected songs? What do you do with those? So you've given them 5 different demos, like you said, on SoundCloud, and maybe they're completely different, not the same song. They only like the 5th one. What do you do with the other 4?
Well, if they're completely different songs and they're just not used in the game, I generally have a clause in my contract that says I get to reuse all that material.
And that's the key.
We need one
so-
song,
and that's really
this
important.
You
alarm
wanna have
clock
that in your
thing or
contract.
something, like an app or something, and they have this like huge budget, and then you get away with murder. And you make a lot of money, and you didn't have to do any work basically.
Well, because you already did the work.
Because you already did the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you can repatriate your music, please, do it. For sure.
Yep. Yep. Okay, cool. And so what do you delegate, if anything, to other contractors?
Sound effects.
Typically, I do everything, but I have a big project right now where we're doing implementation. So I'm offloading the most of the sound design to another sound designer, and we're working together in the same session, FMOD session, and then I'm doing the music. So it depends on the project. But this one had a lot of creature sounds that were going to take a lot of time, and I didn't want to spend all that much time on it, so I found someone who could do that. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Want to chat about that one too?
I was just gonna say hip hop. There's like certain music styles which like you just can't fake. So we'll look for specialists for that stuff.
Heavy metal.
Yeah, like metal, hip hop, Zydeco or something weird. That's just like you can't. You have to know how to do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just sounds terrible.
Yep. Great. All right, so next, and we're not going to focus too much on these because I think it'll infringe on yours a little bit, but so pleasing clients versus your artistic integrity and what you know to be best. This is an issue that comes up a lot in these sort of panels where they say, oh, we really want it to sound like John Williams or something, and it's like, oh God, another one of those, but like you have something else in mind, like, but it would be so much cooler if we did this really weird, obscure thing, and they're just like, oh, but no games do that, so it can't be. That's going to be bad. So if you really believe in something else, how far do you push the client? How far do you risk that relationship of them getting ticked off and hiring someone else versus knowing that you really want to innovate and do something that could really be a hit rather than just kind of be okay?
That's a really good question. That's a tough line to walk. I think it really depends on the personality of the developer or the designer you're working with. If you, and I hate to say it, but if you respect them and think that they know what they're doing, then you really have to defer to their judgment. If you can kind of sense that they don't really know and they're just trying to kind of latch onto something, a lot of times they're very receptive to that leadership that you can bring to them. We do something called temping, which I think a lot of people do. It's definitely not our own concept, but we will, capture the game and we will put usually our own pre-existing music against it and send it to them as a pitch and say, well, we want to do, here's what we're thinking in terms of style, mood, tempo, orchestration, so forth. What do you think? Like, here's 3 or 4 different ideas. We like number 2, or we think 4 is like really interesting and cool. And they will usually be pretty receptive to that. Maybe want to tweak it and kind of curtail it a little bit to more of the brand vision or more, the vision of the art or something that we don't have the full awareness of. But there's no one answer to that in my experience.
I just think it's really important to try to get on the same page as your client as early as possible, because it can create all kinds of problems for sure. Yeah, but I mean, it is a learning process with new clients and kind of figuring out, if you have a good working relationship, because not every developer or every person that you want to work with is gonna turn out to be a good thing. Sometimes people are just incompatible, just like love.
Bad relationship. You need a psychotherapist afterward.
I've had that happen. Yeah. Yeah, like Nick said, I think it really depends on who you're working with, how well you know them, and who they are. I've worked with, designers who've been around for a while, and I really respected their opinions on things. Like you've worked with John Romero before, and I sit down to talk music with John Romero. The guy's got more game music on his phone than I've ever listened to in my life, and he knows everything. And when John has an idea, I take it seriously and we try it out, and we have good discussions about it. He's like, okay, I guess my idea didn't work. Let's try something else, and that's great. And then I've had other situations where I've had maybe someone who's kind of pushed into a situation that they didn't want to be in the point person on audio, and they were new to it, and they thought they wanted something like this game, and they give me an example, and I'll say, well, I don't know if that art style, your art style, fits this game's art style. Maybe we should try something different. They still kind of push for it, and in one particular situation, the way that I finally got to go in the direction that I wanted was, we did like 12 revisions, and they saw how much that was going to cost, and so they're like, "Wait, let's go with your idea." And that was finally what pushed them over the edge, and it worked. The first thing I gave them that was my idea was the one they went with. So one thing that Nick said I think is a great idea is getting some game footage and then trying some different things and sending that to them, selling them on the idea. You can talk about it all day long until you actually show them what you've got and how your idea will work with the game. I think that really helps sell what you want to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I usually try and extract as much information from the developer as possible in terms of, very specific musical reference material, art style guides, game design docs, what the game mechanic is, so I can sort of triangulate and determine whether they really know what they're talking about or whether they're going to need input from myself. And most of the times, at least the people that we work with have very specific music reference that they like. And if it's something like John Williams, you can usually go in and extract. He does certain things, and if you know what those are, then you can generally replicate that, something in the vein of John Williams that is, somewhat original to the game and so forth, but still using some things that might give people the impression that it's been sort of, composed in that style of music. The temp stuff I think is a good idea. I mean, obviously, if you're temping, full bandwidth film music, you run the risk of trying to replicate that with sample library if you don't have a budget for a live ensemble, and that can be a problem too, because you just can't in certain cases. So I try and be a little bit careful of that, but most of the time I can usually determine what people are looking for if I ask for the right materials, and for sure game build as well. If I can sit and play to the build, get an idea of what again the art style is, how all the game elements are working together, the game mechanic, all that sort of stuff is really super useful.
Great.
And then sometimes you deal with they ask you for one thing. It's like, I want hip hop, but what they really are talking about is Nordic death metal or something, and you just can't then you get into a problem because you're doing massive revisions. You may or may not be being paid for it, and that's where you really have to sort of do some extra work to figure out how to
And the
get
other
around that.
problem I've come up with a lot, and probably you guys too, is sometimes too many people on the team are giving you audio feedback.
That's true
so we
too,
have a
yes.
programmer and an artist and the vice president and the coffee maker.
Yes.
I mean, so
That's
yeah. So how do you handle that? Do you put your foot down, or you just let them all disagree and redo it a million times? Do you charge them extra? I mean, how do you handle that generally?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Exactly. It's a tough one.
Let me think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Well, we have. I mean, we just do something where we have sort of approval milestones, and then that's like a point of no return. So if you have a temping process and they rubber stamp, a style of music, you can hold them accountable to certain decisions at that stage, and then you're limiting how far back you can go. So that's a really kind of key. And that's just framing the conversation. It's not like a contractual thing. It's just being able to point to that key email where they say, yes, this style is approved, go forward. And then if they change it, you can really point to that and say, look, this is now a new scope of work. This is not a revision. This is a new cue, because you've completely changed your orientation.
The scope direction change is a good point, because that's usually what we do as well. If it's like a change
Mike,
of scope,
can you use the mic, Barry?
Change of scope, change of direction. So if you end up going down one path, it's a certain style of music. If you've identified that in your original contract and then it shifts to something completely different, then that's usually, as you say, a benchmark that you can't, a point of no return that you can't move back from.
And I'm sure we're going to talk more about this at 3 o'clock, so we'll just go on. So this is just talking about game style in general, because this comes up for me a lot. Like, what is the sound of a game, and should games sound like games, or is that a thing of the past? You know, games sounded like games because of the technology, but now we can make them sound like other things. They can sound like film, they can sound like pop music. So is there a place for that 8-bit, 16-bit sound? Should games be really melodic, or does it depend completely on the type of game that you're working on?
I've always found it's highly dependent on the game. I mean, I've been in a bunch of situations where it's like really obvious that they're trying to, you know, copy this cinematic film-esque thing. The music needs to be like that. There's musical motifs that are based on each character in the game that get repeated down the line. And also, you know, the opposite end of the spectrum where it's very, you know, the art style is 8-bit. They want 8-bit style music, and it's pretty cut and dry, at least in my journeys. So it's usually, you know, it's very cut and dry for me.
Does 8-bit music belong in games?
Well, I think even when you're technically doing the same kind of style of music over and over, it's important to, as an artist, to have to feel like you're pushing yourself forward and you're doing something new. Like, I mean, I've done maybe a dozen games with like chiptune type music in them, but every game has different, and it pushed me in some new way. Like, there was a game where I did the entire soundtrack using FM synthesis, and I'd never done that before. Or, you know, bringing it into a contemporary space in some way, or saying this game is going to be Game Boy aesthetic, this game's going to be NES aesthetic, etc. So I think it's so contextual, and you have to know what, you know, you have to figure out what you want and what the game deserves, and go from there.
Did you have something to add?
No.
Okay. I was just going to add to that. I agree with what everyone said, but I think one thing to take into consideration as well is game mix, especially depending on your platform. You had mentioned game mixing before, and then someone asked about iPhones and iPads and mixing for those platforms. And I think I've noticed a lot. I've had a few jobs come to me where they have this song sounds good, but it doesn't sound good on the iPhone, and I've had to kind of go in and just do some EQ stuff, like, you know, taking out snare drums or hi-hats that were too loud that are really going to poke out on an iPhone speaker, you know. So you have to really take into consideration how it's going to sound as game music, especially in-game music that you're going to hear repetitively on a loop. You really got to watch all those EQ things that will poke out on particular platforms. So, yeah.
Good. Okay, we're on our last slide, so we're doing good here. So, we're talking about gear, right? So we get to be gear nerds now. So what kind of gear is essential, do you think? Do you want to, what kind of, should you use a PC or a Mac, or does it matter? What are the best kinds of monitors? What kind of mics do you use? What do you record? I record like usually 1 or 2 live instruments a lot of times with something, so I have to have a nice mic around for that, and I do in-house voiceover recording as well, which I use a different mic for. What kind of interface do you use? Sound interface. Your software, are you a Pro Tools person, etc. So let's comment on gear.
Oh, all right. Well, no, I'll be brief. I used to run dual platform Mac and PC, and then I stopped and went back over to the PC because everything, like the build environments, at the time, Fmod, some of the middleware stuff was PC only, so I discovered that it was really a hassle to go back and forth between the two. So now I run Pro Tools on a PC, and I pretty much run everything, actually. Pro Tools, a lot of the Sony stuff. We have to carry a really large sound effect library, some of which is proprietary, some of which is third party. For me personally, I do a lot of the orchestral stuff, so I have to, use a lot of the third-party libraries and so forth. Live ensemble stuff is great if you have the budget to do it, and that's probably a whole other talk about getting people to recognize why live ensemble is better than sample library and what you can and can't do with it, what you can and can't do with the sample library stuff. And but then there's always the negotiation of getting the client to buy off on that because there's expense involved and so forth. So. And usually if there's something that, a project that's going to require gear or something that we don't have, then we'll go out and figure out how we can get a hold of it. But we tend to run a lot of stuff all the time. So
Okay.
you guys geek out now.
All right. Maybe it's because of my vintage, but I'm a big fan of recording things and I have a lot of mics and preamps and things like that. Not a ton of them, but I like having different flavors and things to choose from, and I like playing with that stuff. I enjoy field recording a lot. I take out my field recorder a lot and record my own sounds, and I use Logic, I use a Mac, got some good speakers. I don't know, it's funny, you have good speakers to hear these things on, and then you end up mixing the earbuds anyway, so it's kind of funny how that works these days. But anyway, yeah, I don't think it really matters if you're using Mac or PC or Pro Tools or Logic. Whatever you're comfortable with and gets you there is the most important thing. However good you are at your tools is really what matters. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's really any gear that's essential. It's just the what you do with what you have and what you want to do, and can you reach that? For me, I like to kind of have a minimalist setup. Just a laptop. I'm a Mac guy. I use Logic, interface, MIDI keyboard. And monitors. That's pretty much it. And for me, it's having an upright piano in my house is extremely important to me, and having come up with ideas on it, record them, and recording ideas all the time, and then coming back to them, pulling them out, using them for projects. Yeah.
I think the only piece of equipment that we would be like really hampered without is SoundMiner, and just being able to easily navigate through like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of samples. Trying to do that on a manual level would just be insane. So that's a really key tool. Apart from that, I agree with everybody else. It doesn't really matter.
Great. So we have time for one more question for the panel, and then we'll open it up for a couple questions, and then it's lunchtime. But do you have any creative techniques you want to share that you do that are strange, that might help you compose something if you're not in the mood? I don't know how many times I've had to write something and I'm just not there. So I do a couple things. One is I invent lyrics for a melody. If you've seen my talks before, you know about this little trick. But I had to create this ice castle theme, and I just couldn't think of it. And so I came up with, splendid, beautiful, and cold is the castle. And that was a melody. And it just kind of came through my head. And I actually used the developer's words, splendid, beautiful, and cold. So I didn't even have to think of the lyrics myself. Sometimes I use weird things like I roll dice because I'm a classical music geek. And, you could use a 10-sided die, and a 1 is a do, and a 2 is a re, and a 3 is a mi. And you just make a melody, and if it sucks, you just do it again. It's very D&D, but it actually works really well, and then you harmonize it, and it's like, wow, I just made a random melody. That's awesome. So do you have anything like that to share?
I do like to just kind of run off at the mouth and with rhythms or musical ideas or whatever, and then record them. And sometimes I'll even transcribe them. I'll have this idea about a melody or something, but I can't really, it's kind of vague, but the rhythm is not vague, so I'll bring it into a session, and then I'll transcribe music to it and kind of come up with ideas that way. And just having lots of ways to kind of come up with stuff like that. I have this deck of cards called Oblique Strategies by Brian Eno, which has been very useful. It's cool for getting through roadblocks and thinking of new ways of approaching your project. So
cool.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things I do. The main thing that I usually fall back on is just pulling out my iPhone or any kind of field recorder, anything I have with me. It's usually the phone, and just recording things that are in my head. Sometimes I just start singing out loud into the mic, and then eventually something will come out that I like, and then by about the third or fourth time, I'll have something that I like, and then I go and actually try and put it into the computer some way. But I do that a lot, and that really does help. Sometimes, if I'm especially writing a picture, sometimes if I have a trailer or something I'm working on, I just put it in front of me and just sing as the thing goes through. And I've really gotten some of my best stuff that way. And just taking away that technique of sitting in front of the piano or the guitar in your lap or whatever, and just putting out there without any restrictions helps. And I know it sounds weird in very Bay Area, but meditation helps me a lot too. That helps me kind of. Yeah, right. It's very California. If you're not from around here, then you know. But yeah, meditation really helps a lot. Just to calm down your mind and get into touch that subconscious a little bit and come back. I think really helps.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I kind of do some of the same stuff as I like. If I'm starting some music, I tend to skip the technology and just do quick 3-line sketches on piano before I even get to the sequencer, because I think it's a lot easier for me personally to see what I'm doing with the music. And I think some people think that that's the slower way to go, but I actually think it's a lot faster, because once I get to the sequencer, I can just burn through stuff, and I don't have to worry about, I can see what's going on in the music. I don't have to like scroll through a piano roll editor to figure out what note's going where and all that stuff. By the time I get to the sequencing part of it, I've got it arranged in a way that's pretty solid. Then the technology part of it just goes by really quickly. There's no bog down. I have a roadmap. I know exactly where I'm at, how to orchestrate it, and all that sort of stuff. And so with that in mind, I also will just sit and look at something and have stuff run through my head, and then try and figure out, get it out of my cell phone to paper, notation, or whatever, and then go from there. So.
All right, awesome. Well, we have a couple of questions, time for just a couple of burning questions, and then we got to feed everyone because we're back here at 1 o'clock. So, like 2 questions. So this is one. There you go.
Hi, Dirk Wallace with Voice to Game. It sounds like, Nick, you may address some of this later in your presentation, but this question centers around a couple frustrations that we have in dealing with developers. And what we run into is a consistently last-minute requests for our voiceovers, and that creates issues, obviously, sometimes in finding the right voice for a very unique character, and then also clarity issues. Sometimes we're working with foreign developers where the grammar is incorrect. We don't have time to suggest, or sometimes they're not as receptive to the changes that we would recommend. And then also oftentimes ambiguous dialogue, where something like, "Where have you been?" That could be read a million different ways in a script. What have you found is the best, approach to talk to developers about more time and creating more clarity to offer the best product possible?
So this is a really, really long question. So it's a great question,
I'm sorry.
We will be addressing it later in the day. But you can respond for like 45 seconds.
We produce a lot of VO. We've run into that same problem. We try to have a 48-hour minimum. And then there's a financial consequence, which really helps motivate people. So having some window of time where you have one opportunity to send questions is important. You could also create a template for your VO where you have a column that's direction and like tone, and you could put like even prefab options in there in like a file maker. So it's angry, confused, sad, frustrated, excited, whatever. So you have some basic direction. And then apart from that, you just got to record it a bunch of different ways, just so you have options.
Cool. Okay, so there's one more question, I think, over there. No, you're good. All right, well, give everyone here a round of applause for sharing. And I know there's lots more questions and lots more to talk about, and that's why we're here all day, and we have the party at 6 o'clock at Saluna, so you can definitely snag someone there and chat them up. So we'll be back at 1 or so.